The scream came first. Not from pain, King Riker Ashenblade had heard enough of those to know the difference, but from something far more primal. Fear. The kind that shredded vocal cords and carved itself into memory. It tore through the stone corridors of Blackmore Castle at 3 in the morning, jolting him from the half-sleep that was all he ever allowed himself. His eyes snapped open in the darkness of his royal chambers, every muscle coiled, every sense sharpened to a killing edge. The scream had come from inside his room. Riker was on his feet before conscious thought caught up, his massive frame moving with the lethal grace of a predator. Moonlight spilled through the arched windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. His hand found the hilt of the ceremonial blade he kept beneath his pillow, not because he needed a weapon, but because some nights, the thing inside him needed to be reminded that steel still existed in a world it wanted to consume. Then he saw her. Collapsed on the floor beside his writing desk, one pale hand stretched toward the ornate wooden chair, the other clutched against her chest. Her maid's uniform, simple gray cotton, always too large for her slight frame, was twisted around her legs as if she'd been trying to run. Dark hair spilled across the cold stone like ink. And there, pressed against her heart as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered to this world, was his diary. The leather-bound journal he'd hidden behind a false panel in the desk. The one no living soul was meant to find. The one that contained every unspeakable thing the void shadow had ever whispered, commanded, or threatened. Every single word. Riker's heart, the part of it that still remembered how to beat for something other than survival, stopped completely. No. The scream hadn't come from her. It had come from him. Riker's throat burned with the echo of it, though he couldn't remember releasing the sound. His hands were shaking, something that hadn't happened since he was a boy of 12, the night the void shadow first showed him what it meant to be chosen by darkness. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to his knees beside her, and pressed 2 fingers to the pulse point at her throat. Alive. Barely. Her skin was ice-cold, her lips tinged with blue. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps that sounded like drowning. But it was her eyes that made his blood turn to lead. They were open. Not vacant, not unconscious, open. Staring straight up at the vaulted ceiling, pupils blown so wide they'd swallowed the color entirely. Black on black on black. And in those depths, something moved. Something that writhed and coiled and recognized him. No, Riker whispered, his voice fracturing. No, not her. Anyone but. He stopped himself. Because he knew exactly what this was. The Maid, gods, he didn't even know her name, had never bothered to learn it in the 2 years she'd been assigned to his chambers, wasn't just unconscious. She was marked. The same way he'd been marked at 12. The same way every Ashenblade king had been marked since the bloodline bargain was struck 4 centuries ago. The void shadow had found a new host. But that was impossible. The shadow was bound to him. Chained to his bloodline through ancient magic and blood oaths that couldn't be broken. It couldn't transfer. It couldn't. His gaze snapped to the diary still clutched in her rigid fingers. Slowly, as though the air itself had turned to syrup, Riker reached for it. The moment his skin brushed the leather cover, pain exploded through his skull like a blade driven between his eyes. He gasped, jerked back, and the maid's body convulsed. Once. Twice. Her back arched off the floor, head thrown back, mouth opening in a silent scream that never found sound. And then she went completely still. Riker's instinct screamed at him to call for the royal healer, to summon the guards, to do something, but his mind, the part of it that had learned to think 3 steps ahead of every threat, was already putting pieces together he didn't want to see. The diary had been moved from its hiding place. The maid had collapsed while holding it. The void shadow, the entity that had lived inside him, fed on him, used him for 30 years, felt distant. Muted. like a voice shouting from the other side of a locked door. "What did you do?" he asked the unconscious woman, his voice barely more than a rasp. "What the hell did you do?" The answer came not from her, but from the diary itself. The leather cover began to smoke. Not burn, smoke. Tendrils of black vapor rose from the binding, curling into the air like living things, and where they touched the moonlight, they didn't dissipate. They solidified. Shapes formed in the darkness. Symbols. Words written in a language that predated kingdoms and crowns. Riker recognized them immediately. They were his own confessions. "I commanded the execution of 16 wolves today. The shadow demanded 20. I bargained it down. It was not pleased. The village of Thornhollow asked for mercy. I granted them death instead. The shadow feeds on broken hope. I am so tired. Some nights, I dream of walking into the forest and never coming back. But if I die, it finds someone else. Someone weaker. Someone who won't fight it. So I stay. I endure. I become the monster so no one else has to." Page after page, confession after confession, suspended in smoke around the collapsed Maid. And Riker understood. She had read it. All of it. But reading wasn't enough to do this. To weaken the shadow. To pull it from him and into. His thoughts fractured as the Maid's eyes suddenly focused. Locked onto his. And in a voice that wasn't hers, too deep, too ancient, layered with the screams of 1,000 consumed souls, she spoke. "Alpha King," the void shadow purred through her lips, "did you really think words on paper could cage me? Did you think confessing your sins made you pure?" Riker's hand found her shoulder, and he shook her, gently at first, then harder. "Fight it. Whatever you are, whatever you did, fight it." "She cannot hear you," the shadow continued, and the Maid's body sat up with jerking, unnatural movements, like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. "She consumed your darkness willingly. Page by page. Night by night. She fed on your sins, little king, thinking she could save you." The truth hit him like a warhammer to the chest. She wasn't just a maid. She was a sin-eater. The rarest, most forbidden kind of wolf, bred by rival packs, trained to absorb corruption too potent to destroy. Living vessels for the darkness others couldn't bear. He'd heard stories. Legends. Warnings passed down through generations of alpha kings. Never trust a sin-eater. They smile while they devour you from within. But this one had been trying to help him. "How long?" Riker demanded, his voice cracking. "How long has she been?" 2 years, the shadow hissed, and the Maid's head tilted at an angle no human spine should allow. "Every night you slept, she crept to your desk. Every word you wrote, she consumed. Every sin you confessed, she swallowed. She thought she was strong enough. She thought she could drain me without cost." The Maid's body convulsed again, and this time, blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. "But your darkness is not ordinary, is it, King? Your sins are ancient. Royal. Poisonous. And now—" The shadow laughed, a sound like breaking bones and tearing flesh. "Now she will become what you never could. Unless, of course." The Maid's hand shot out, faster than sight, and locked around Riker's wrist with inhuman strength. "You kill her first." The Alpha King stared into the face of the woman who had tried to save him, and saw only the monster he'd spent 30 years keeping caged. If she died, the shadow returned to him stronger than ever. If she lived, she might become something far worse. But there was a third option. One he'd never considered. One that terrified him more than any battlefield, any betrayal, any blood oath. He could try to save her back. The Maid's name was Dorothy. Riker learned this not from her personnel file or the head housekeeper's records, but from the shallow, ragged breaths she took as he carried her to his bed. Each exhale formed a single syllable as though her dying body was trying to remind itself who it had been before the darkness took root. He laid her on silk sheets that had never known warmth, her small frame barely making an impression on the mattress. In 2 years of service, she had changed these sheets hundreds of times. Had she ever wondered what it felt like to lie here? Had she pitied him for the cold, empty expanse of a bed built for two but occupied by a king who couldn't risk letting anyone close? "Dorothy," he said, testing the name. It tasted like regret. Her eyes had closed again, but beneath the lids, her pupils moved frantically, trapped in whatever nightmare the void shadow was weaving through her consciousness. Black veins had begun to spiderweb across her temples, down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her uniform. The same pattern that had marked Riker's skin the night he inherited the throne and the curse that came with it. He knew what happened next. The veins would spread. The shadow would burrow deeper, wrapping itself around her heart, her lungs, her mind. She would have hours, maybe a day if she was strong, before it consumed her completely. Before Dorothy ceased to exist and only the monster remained. Unless he acted. But every option led to blood. Riker moved to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Below, Blackmoor stretched out in layers of stone and shadow, a kingdom built on fear, held together by the iron grip of a king who hadn't chosen power so much as been devoured by it. 30 years. 30 years he'd carried the void shadow, and in all that time, he'd never told a soul what it cost him. Not his council. Not his generals. Not even Kevin, his second, the only wolf in the kingdom who'd known him before the curse. The diary had been his only confessor. And she had read every word. Why? Riker asked the unconscious woman. Why would you do something so reckless? The answer came not from Dorothy, but from memory. 6 months ago. A state dinner in the Grand Hall. Riker had just ordered the execution of a merchant lord caught embezzling from the crown. The shadow had wanted the man's entire family dead, wife, children, even the infant daughter. Riker had negotiated it down to just the lord himself, then spent the rest of the evening fighting the splitting headache that always followed when he denied the shadow what it craved. He'd retreated to his chambers early, dismissing the guards, wanting only silence and darkness. But when he entered, she was there. The maid. Dorothy. Kneeling by the fireplace, carefully arranging logs that didn't need arranging. She'd looked up when he entered, and for just a moment, their eyes met. He'd expected fear, everyone looked at him with fear. Instead, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Compassion. Not pity. Not sympathy. But genuine, aching compassion, as though she could see past the crown and the cold authority to the exhausted man beneath. "Your Majesty," she'd said softly, rising with a small curtsy. "I've prepared tea. Valerian root and chamomile. For the headaches." He'd stared at her. "I didn't ask for tea." "No, Your Majesty." "But you need it anyway." The audacity should have angered him. Instead, he'd found himself sitting in the chair she gestured to, accepting the cup she offered, drinking bitter tea while a servant girl he'd never truly looked at watched him with knowing eyes. "You see too much," he'd told her. "I see what you let me see," she'd replied. "And what you try to hide." That was the night it started, Riker realized now. The night Dorothy began her secret mission. She must have noticed the diary then, seen him writing in it late at night, recognized it for what it was. A sin-eater would know. They were trained to sense corruption, to identify the vessels that held darkness too dangerous to destroy. She'd been planning this from the beginning. "You fool," Riker whispered to the sleeping woman. "You beautiful, selfless fool." Because now he understood the full scope of what she'd done. Sin Eaters didn't just absorb darkness, they transformed it. Took the raw, poisonous energy of sin and filtered it through their own souls, breaking it down into something that could be endured. Contained. Eventually released. But the void shadow wasn't ordinary sin. It was sentient. Ancient. A parasite that had survived for centuries by jumping from host to host, growing stronger with each generation of Ashenblade blood. Dorothy hadn't just consumed his confessions. She'd been trying to starve the shadow. Weaken it by draining the sins it fed on, page by page, word by word, until it became manageable enough to destroy. It would have worked, Riker said, pressing his hand against the glass hard enough to make it creak. If it had been any other curse, any other darkness, it would have worked. But she'd reached her limit. And now the shadow, weakened but enraged, had found a new host. One it could punish for her audacity. Behind him, Dorothy's breathing changed. Became labored. Wet. Riker spun around and saw blood seeping from her nose, her ears. The black veins had spread to her hands, her fingertips turning gray as the shadow's corruption ate away at her from within. She was dying. And he had a choice to make. Let her die, and the void shadow would return to him, weakened perhaps, but survivable. His kingdom would remain stable. His power intact. Everything would go back to the way it was. Or fight for her. Try to pull the shadow out before it killed her. Risk everything, his throne, his control, his sanity, for a servant girl who'd sacrificed herself trying to save a monster. Riker looked at his hands. Hands that had signed execution orders. Crushed rebellions. Broken oaths. Hands that had never, in 30 years of ruling, reached out to save someone who couldn't save themselves. He moved to the bed and took Dorothy's hand in his. I don't know how to do this, he told her unconscious form. I don't know how to be anything but what the shadow made me. Her fingers twitched in his grip. And deep in his chest, where the void shadow had lived for 3 decades, he felt something he'd thought long dead. Hope. The castle healer arrived within minutes of Riker's summons, an elderly wolf named Marin whose silver hair and calm demeanor had seen her through 3 generations of Ashenblade rule. She took one look at Dorothy's deteriorating condition and went perfectly still. Your Majesty, she said carefully, this is shadow corruption. Advanced stage. I know what it is. Then you know there's nothing I can do. Marin's voice was gentle but firm. Sin Eater sickness is beyond my skills. Beyond anyone's. The darkness has to run its course. Run its course, Riker repeated flatly. You mean let her die? I mean she's already dead, Your Majesty. Her body just hasn't accepted it yet. Marin moved closer to the bed, studying the black veins with clinical detachment. How long has she been consuming corruption? 2 years. The healer's eyes widened. That's impossible. No Sin Eater can sustain that level of absorption for more than a few months. A year at most. She reached for Dorothy's wrist, checking her pulse. What kind of darkness was she eating? Riker said nothing. Understanding dawned across Marin's weathered features. Oh. Oh no. She stepped back from the bed as though it had caught fire. Your Majesty, she consumed the void shadow? Directly from she caught herself, lowered her voice. From the source? Through written confession. The diary. Gods have mercy. Marin's hands trembled as she clasped them together. Your Majesty, if what's inside her is what I think it is, then this girl is not just dying. She's becoming a vessel for something that should never have left your bloodline. If the transfer completes. The door to the royal chamber slammed open. Kevin Thornridge, second to the Alpha King and the only wolf alive who could enter without knocking, stood in the doorway. 6.5 feet of scarred muscle and barely controlled fury, his dark eyes swept the room and landed on the scene at the bed. what happened? His voice was a low growl. Close the door, Riker ordered. Riker, what the hell? Close the door. Kevin kicked it shut behind him and crossed to the bed in 3 strides. When he saw Dorothy, saw the shadow corruption spreading across her skin, his expression went from anger to horror. Is that the maid? The quiet one who works nights? Her name is Dorothy, Riker said. And she's been saving my life for 2 years. He told Kevin everything. The diary. The sin eating. The transfer of the void shadow from king to servant girl. When he finished, Kevin was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. You kept a diary? Kevin said incredulously. A written record of every. He stopped himself, ran both hands through his hair. Riker, do you have any idea how reckless that was? If the wrong people found that. She found it. And she tried to save me. By killing herself? By starving the shadow. Riker moved to the opposite side of the bed, his gaze fixed on Dorothy's too pale face. It was working, Kevin. I could feel it weakening. Every page she consumed made it quieter, made it easier to think without its voice in my head. For the first time in 30 years, I thought I might actually be free. And now? Now it's killing her instead of me. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Dorothy's labored breathing and the crackle of the fireplace. Marin cleared her throat softly. Your Majesty, I must advise. The maid's eyes snapped open. But they weren't her eyes anymore. Pure black from corner to corner, no white, no iris, just endless darkness that reflected nothing and swallowed light. Her mouth opened, and when she spoke, the voice was layered with dozens of others, all screaming in harmony. 3 souls in one room, the void shadow purred through Dorothy's lips. The king who caged me. The second who suspects. The healer who knows too much. Which one shall I take next? Marin stumbled backward, gasping. Kevin's hand went to the blade at his hip. But Riker held his ground. You're not taking anyone, he said evenly. You're going back where you came from. Dorothy's body sat up with jerking, unnatural movements. Her head swiveled toward him, neck cracking with each degree of rotation. Back? Oh, little king, I'm not going back. This vessel is young. Strong. Uncorrupted by the weight of your crown. The shadow made Dorothy's face smile, a grotesque expression that looked wrong on her delicate features. She opened herself to me willingly. Fed on your sins like honey. Did you know she loved you? Stupid girl. Thought she could save the monster by becoming one herself. Riker's heart stopped. What did you say? Every night she read your confessions, she wept for you. Every sin she consumed, she whispered your name like a prayer. The shadow laughed, and blood trickled from Dorothy's nose. She saw the man you could have been. The king you should have been. And it broke her heart. You're lying. Am I? The shadow released its hold for just a moment, just long enough for Dorothy's true self to surface. Her eyes flickered back to their natural color, a warm hazel gold, and locked onto Riker's face with desperate clarity. Your Majesty, she gasped, blood staining her teeth. I'm sorry. I thought I was strong enough. I thought. Her words cut off as the shadow slammed back into control, and she screamed. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart. Kevin lunged forward, but Riker caught his arm. Don't. If you touch her now, it'll jump to you. Then what do we do? Riker looked at Marin. You said Sin Eater sickness has to run its course. What does that mean, exactly? The healer's face was ashen. It means the absorbed corruption either kills the host, or the host transforms it completely. There's no middle ground. How long? Hours. Maybe less, given the power of what she consumed. And if she transforms it? If she survives? Marin met his eyes, and in them, Riker saw a truth that made his blood run cold. Then she becomes something new. Something that's never existed before, a sin-eater who's consumed a void shadow and lived. She won't be human anymore, Your Majesty. She won't even be wolf. What will she be? A weapon. Or a savior. Depending on who controls her. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. And Riker made his choice. Everyone out. Kevin's head snapped toward him. What? You heard me. Riker didn't take his eyes off Dorothy's convulsing form. Leave us. Riker, if you think I'm going to let you face that thing alone. That thing is a woman who sacrificed everything to save me. Riker's voice dropped to a lethal calm. And I won't let her die surrounded by people who see her as a threat. Marin gathered her supplies with shaking hands. Your Majesty, please reconsider. If the shadow fully manifests, then it's my burden to bear. It always has been. He finally looked at them both. Go. That's an order. Kevin held his ground for 3 more seconds, a small rebellion, but rebellion nonetheless. Then he jerked his head toward the door. Come on, Marin. The stubborn bastards made up his mind. As they moved toward the exit, Kevin paused at the threshold. Riker. Whatever you're planning, don't do anything I wouldn't do. That gives me disturbingly wide latitude. Exactly. A ghost of a smile crossed Kevin's scarred face. Don't die in here. I'm not ready to be king. The door closed, leaving Riker alone with the dying maid and the monster they shared. Dorothy had stopped screaming, but the silence was worse. Her body lay rigid on the bed, every muscle locked in agony, the black veins now covering nearly half her visible skin. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that sounded like tearing paper. Riker pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. I don't know if you can hear me, he said quietly. The shadow likes to bury its hosts deep, make them watch as it uses their bodies like puppets. If you're in there, Dorothy, I need you to listen. No response. Just the wet rattle of corrupted lungs. You've been watching me for 2 years. Reading my darkest thoughts. Consuming my sins. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So you know I'm not good at this. Talking. Feeling. Being anything other than the weapon my bloodline forged me into. The black veins pulsed, spreading another inch toward her heart. But you tried anyway, didn't you? Tried to save someone who didn't deserve saving. Who couldn't even see you as more than a servant until you were dying in his bed. Riker reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. It was ice cold, the fingers rigid. The shadow said you loved me. I don't know if that's true or just another lie to twist the knife. But if it is true. He drew a breath that felt like swallowing glass. Then you loved someone who forgot what love even looks like. Who spent 30 years turning himself into stone so the darkness couldn't find cracks. Dorothy's hand twitched in his grip. I remember the first time I saw you, Riker continued, his voice rough. Not the first time you were assigned to my chambers, I didn't notice you then. I mean the first time I actually saw you. It was 3 months into your service. You'd been dusting the bookshelves, and I walked in earlier than usual. You didn't hear me enter. He could see it in his mind's eye, clear as yesterday. You were reading one of the books. Some old poetry collection that had been there since my grandfather's reign. You were completely absorbed, lips moving slightly as you read, and when you smiled at whatever passage caught your attention, it was radiant. Pure. The kind of expression I hadn't seen in these walls since I was a child. The black veins slowed their progression. Just barely, but enough to notice. I almost said something. Almost asked what you were reading. But then you noticed me and that smile vanished. Replaced by fear and formality. Your Majesty. Forgive me. I shouldn't have, and I did what I always do. I pretended not to care. Dismissed you without a word. Riker's grip tightened on her hand. But I went back to that shelf the next day. Found the book you'd been reading. The page was still marked where you'd left off. A poem about sacrifice and redemption. About loving something broken enough to try making it whole, even when it cut you in the process. Dorothy's eyes moved beneath their lids. Searching. Is that what you were doing, Dorothy? Trying to make me whole? Deep in his chest, where the void shadow had lived for 3 decades, Riker felt space. Emptiness. The constant pressure of the shadow's presence, the whispers, the demands, the endless hunger, had faded to a distant murmur. It was in her now. All of it. I can feel the difference, he admitted. Without the shadow, I'm lighter. My thoughts are my own. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I can think without its voice corrupting everything. His voice cracked. You gave me that. You gave me myself. And I didn't even know your name. The black veins stopped spreading. Dorothy's eyes opened. Not the complete darkness of the shadow's control, but not her natural hazel gold either. Something in between, brown shot through with threads of black, like storm clouds at sunset. Your Majesty, she whispered, her voice weak but her own. You're still here. Where else would I be? Safe. Away from me. Each word seemed to cost her. The shadow, it wants to kill you. Punish you for caging it. I can feel its rage. Its hunger. Let it rage. You don't understand. Tears slipped down her temples, cutting through the ash-gray pallor of her skin. It's showing me things. Your memories. Every person you've executed. Every village you've burned. Every mercy you denied because the shadow demanded blood. Then you see what I am. No. Her hand turned in his grip, fingers weakly curling around his. I see what you've endured. Every terrible choice was you fighting to minimize the damage. Every execution was you saving dozens by sacrificing one. You're not a monster, Your Majesty. You're a man who's been at war with himself for 30 years. Something in Riker's chest cracked. The shadow told you I couldn't be saved. The shadow lies. Dorothy's eyes met his, fierce despite her failing strength. I've consumed 2 years of your truth. I know you better than it ever could. And that's why you're dying. Maybe. She smiled, weak, but genuine. Or maybe I'm becoming something that can finally kill it. The black veins began to recede. Not much. Just a fraction of an inch. But it was enough to make Riker's heart surge with something he'd thought long dead. The transformation began at dawn. Riker had kept vigil through the night, watching the battle rage beneath Dorothy's skin, black veins advancing, then retreating, then surging forward again in waves that made her body convulse with pain she was too weak to scream through. But as the first rays of sunlight pierced the windows, something changed. The darkness stopped fighting. It began to settle. Dorothy's eyes snapped open, fully conscious for the first time in hours. The storm cloud mixture of brown and black had stabilized into something new, irises that swirled like smoke, never quite one color or the other. It's adapting, she gasped. The shadow. It's adapting to me. Riker leaned forward. What do you mean? Sin Eaters transform corruption by breaking it down, filtering it through our own essence. Her breathing was still labored, but stronger. But the void shadow won't break. It's too old. Too sentient. So instead of destroying it. Her hand pressed against her chest, right over her heart. My body is trying to merge with it. That's not transformation. That's possession. No. It's different. She struggled to sit up, and Riker supported her with an arm behind her shoulders. Possession is the shadow taking control. This is integration. Like two rivers flowing into one. I can feel it learning from me, just as I'm learning from it. What is it learning? Dorothy's gaze locked onto his, and in those swirling eyes, Riker saw something that made his breath catch. Recognition. Deep and profound. Everything, she whispered. Every memory you've ever written in that diary, the shadow absorbed through me. But it didn't just consume your sins, your majesty. It consumed your reasons. Your pain. Your guilt. Her hand found his face, fingertips tracing the hard line of his jaw. It consumed your humanity. And now it can't unknow it. A tremor ran through her body, and the black veins pulsed once, but this time, they didn't spread. They concentrated, drawing inward toward her heart in thin, dark lines that looked almost like veins of ore in marble. Beautiful, in a terrible way. The shadow is showing me things it's never shown you, Dorothy continued, her voice taking on a strange, dual quality, her own words layered with something deeper. Memories from before your bloodline. From when it was first bound to the Ashenblade Kings. Riker went still. That's impossible. The binding ritual was 4 centuries ago. The shadow never speaks of it. Because it was betrayed. Her eyes rolled back, and when she spoke again, the shadow's voice merged fully with hers. We were not always a curse, little king. Once, we were offered a gift. A weapon against the darkness that came before darkness had a name. What are you talking about? Dorothy's body shuddered, and tears of pure black slid down her cheeks. Your ancestor. Andy Ashenblade. He didn't bind the shadow to save his kingdom. He bound it to steal its power. The shadow was a guardian spirit, a protector of the boundary between life and death. Andy tricked it. Trapped it. Enslaved it. The revelation hit Riker like a physical blow. That can't be true. The histories say. The histories were written by victors who needed a monster to justify their tyranny. The dual voice cracked with centuries of rage and grief. We protected this land for 1,000 years before your bloodline existed. And when Andy's greed opened a door that should have stayed closed, when true darkness threatened to consume everything, we offered to help. To merge with the king's bloodline and give him the power to seal the breach. Dorothy's hand clutched at Riker's shirt, pulling him closer. But he wanted more. He wanted the power without the cost. So he twisted the ritual. Turned a willing partnership into a prison. We've been caged inside Ashenblade flesh for 400 years, feeding on sin because that's the only sustenance your ancestors' spell allows us. Riker's mind reeled. Everything he'd been taught about his bloodline, about the curse that had defined every generation of his family. You're lying. The shadow always lies. Does it? Dorothy's eyes focused on his, and they were filled with a sorrow too deep for words. Or have you just assumed it was lying because the truth would shatter everything you believe about your right to rule? She released his shirt and pressed both hands to her temples, gasping. It's showing me the original ritual. The words Andy spoke. The promise he made and broke. Her voice dropped to a horrified whisper. Your Majesty, the Void Shadow isn't your family's curse. Your family is its curse. The room seemed to tilt. For centuries of Ashenblade kings. For centuries of believing they carried a necessary evil, that their suffering under the shadow's control was the price of power. All of it built on a lie. If this is true, Riker said slowly, then every execution the shadow demanded, every atrocity it pushed me toward. Was it trying to free itself the only way it knew how? Dorothy's hand found his again, gripping tight. By making you so monstrous that someone would finally kill you and break the bloodline's hold. But I never let it win. I always pulled back. Always found a way to minimize the damage. I know. Her smile was sad. That's why it started to respect you. Why it stopped pushing quite as hard after the first decade. You were the first Ashenblade king in 400 years to fight it instead of just trying to control it. The black veins pulsed again, and this time, they began to glow. Not with darkness, but with a strange, silver-edged light that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than flesh and bone. Dorothy gasped, her back arching. It's making a choice. Right now. It can either consume me completely and try to escape, or what? Her eyes met his, and in them, Riker saw a future that terrified and amazed him in equal measure. Or it can let me transform it. Truly transform it. Break Andy's binding from the inside and become what it was always meant to be. She gripped his hand so hard her knuckles went white. But it needs something from you first. What? Forgiveness. Riker stared at her. You want me to forgive the thing that's tormented me for 30 years? I want you to forgive the thing that's been tormented for 400. Tears streamed down her face, clear now, not black. It's the only way to break the cycle. The only way to save us both. Outside, the sun crested the horizon, flooding the room with golden light. And Riker faced the hardest choice of his life. Riker pulled his hand away. The loss of contact hit Dorothy like a physical blow. She gasped, her body curling inward as the black veins surged violently across her skin, spreading with renewed hunger now that his touch was gone. Your Majesty. Don't. His voice was ice. Don't ask me to forgive the thing that made me into this. He stood, backing away from the bed. You have no idea what it's done. What it's made me do. I've consumed 2 years of your confessions. I know exactly what. You know what I wrote. Riker's hands clenched into fists. You don't know the things I couldn't put into words. The nights I woke up with blood under my fingernails and no memory of how it got there. The times the shadow took control completely and I was just watching. Screaming inside my own head while it used my hands to. His voice broke. Dorothy tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey. The shadow was fighting her now, furious at the rejection, trying to seize full control. Please. If you don't do this, it will consume me. We'll both lose. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Riker turned to face the window, his broad shoulders rigid. Maybe the Ashenblade line deserves to end. Maybe I deserve to spend the rest of my life as a hollow shell while you die and the shadow returns to finish what 400 years of my family started. You don't mean that. Don't I? He laughed, bitter and broken. You said it yourself, my ancestor built this kingdom on betrayal. Every Ashenblade king since has ruled through fear and blood. What makes you think I'm any different? What makes you think I'm worth saving? The black veins reached Dorothy's heart. Pain exploded through her chest, white-hot and all-consuming. She screamed, her body convulsing as the void shadow made its final play for dominance. In her mind, she felt it howling, not with triumph, but with rage and despair. He will not forgive. He is Ashenblade. They never forgive. They only take and take and take. Stop. Dorothy choked out, fighting for every word. This isn't what you want. I can feel you. You don't want to kill me. You don't want to go back to him. You just want freedom. We want freedom from this bloodline's chains. The shadow's voice tore through her throat, making her vocal cords bleed. Riker spun around, his face pale. Dorothy. It's afraid, she gasped, blood trickling from her mouth. The shadow is afraid. It's been trapped for so long that it doesn't know how to exist any other way. It doesn't know how to be anything but a monster. We were not always monsters. We were guardians. Protectors. Until Andy broke us. Tears streamed down Dorothy's face, her own tears this time, mixing with the shadow's ancient grief. It's showing me, the moment of betrayal. Andy promising partnership, then binding it with chains made of its own essence. Trapping it inside flesh that dies and rots while it lives forever, forced to jump from father to son, generation after generation, never free, never whole. I'm not Andy, Riker said, his voice raw. But you're his blood. His heir. And every time it looks at you, it sees the man who broke its trust. Dorothy's hands clawed at the sheets as another wave of agony ripped through her. It doesn't know how to separate you from him. Doesn't know how to believe that an Ashenblade could be different. Riker took a step toward the bed, then stopped. Even if I wanted to forgive it, I don't know how. How do you forgive something that's been your jailer and prisoner both? How do you separate 400 years of hate from one moment of choice? You start, Dorothy whispered, by seeing it the way I do. She held out her hand, shaking, covered in black veins, the fingers already going gray at the tips. Touch me. Let me show you what the shadow showed me. Let me give you the truth Andy spent 4 centuries trying to bury. If I touch you now, the shadow could jump back to me. Yes. You could die. Yes. Then why? Because I love you, you stubborn, broken fool. The words came out fierce, desperate. I've loved you since the night you sat in that chair and drank bitter tea and let me see the man beneath the crown. I've loved you through every sin I consumed, every dark confession, every moment you thought you were unworthy of love. Riker's composure shattered. Dorothy, don't. I've been dying for 2 years, Your Majesty. Slowly poisoning myself with your darkness because watching you suffer alone was worse than any death. Her hand remained extended, trembling in the air between them. So if I'm going to die anyway, let it mean something. Let me give you this one truth before the shadow takes me completely. The black veins reached her eyes, threading through the whites like cracks in porcelain. She had minutes left. Maybe less. Riker looked at her outstretched hand. At the woman who'd sacrificed everything for a king who hadn't even known her name. At the dying maid who loved a monster and called him human anyway. I can't, he whispered. Dorothy, I can't watch you die. Not for me. Not like this. Then don't watch me die. Her smile was heartbreaking. Help me live. The room fell silent except for her ragged breathing and the distant toll of the castle bells marking the hour. Riker stood frozen, caught between the only 2 choices that had ever mattered. Save himself. Or save her. Outside the door, Kevin's voice rose in argument with someone, probably Marin, probably trying to convince him to break down the door and end this madness before it was too late. Inside, Dorothy's hand began to drop, her strength finally failing. And Riker made his choice. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and caught her hand before it fell. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded into light and shadow, and Riker saw everything, 400 years of truth compressed into a single, shattering moment of understanding. And he finally understood what it meant to forgive. The vision hit like lightning through his veins. Riker was no longer in his chambers. He stood in a forest that hadn't existed for 4 centuries, ancient trees whose canopies blocked out the sky, their roots glowing with silver light. And before him, suspended between earth and stars, was the void shadow in its true form. Not a parasite. Not a monster. A guardian. Massive and beautiful and terrible, shaped like a wolf made of starlight and darkness woven together, its eyes holding the weight of 1,000 years of protecting the boundary between life and death. Around it, Riker could see the tears in reality it had spent millennia sealing, cracks where things that should never exist tried to claw their way into the world. This is what we were, the shadow's voice rang through him, no longer layered with screams but clear and strong. Before your ancestor made us into a curse. The vision shifted. Now Riker saw Andy Ashenblade, young, ambitious, his face bearing the same sharp features Riker saw in his own mirror each morning. He watched as his ancestor approached the guardian spirit with honeyed words and false promises. "The darkness is too strong," Andy pleaded. "The breach in the veil grows wider each day. My people are dying. I cannot seal it alone. But if you merge with me, if you lend me your power, together we can save this kingdom." The shadow had hesitated. "The price of merger is steep, mortal king. You will carry me always. We will be bound until death, and even beyond. Are you prepared for such a burden?" "I am," Andy had lied. Riker watched the ritual unfold, watched as the shadow willingly entered Andy's body, trusting in the king's word. And then he saw the betrayal, Andy speaking the words that twisted the merger into a binding, the chain snapping closed around the shadow's essence, trapping it inside flesh and bone with no way to escape. The guardian's scream of betrayal echoed across 400 years. He promised partnership. He gave us slavery. The vision shifted again, and Riker saw the generations that followed. King after king, each inheriting the bound shadow, each using its power to conquer and control. Some tried to resist its corrupted whispers. Most didn't. None ever asked why it was so full of rage. None except the woman whose hand he now held. The vision cleared, and Riker found himself back in his chambers. But he was no longer standing. He'd fallen to his knees beside the bed, still gripping Dorothy's hand, tears streaming down his face. "I saw," he choked out. "Gods, I saw what he did to you." Dorothy's eyes were wide, her breathing sharp and rapid. The black veins had stopped spreading. Stopped moving entirely, as though the shadow itself was holding its breath. "Your Majesty." "Riker." His voice cracked. "My name is Riker. If you're going to die holding my hand, the least you can do is use my name." "Riker." She said it like a prayer. "What did you see?" "Everything Andy stole from you. Everything he broke." He pressed her hand to his chest, right over his heart. "You were never meant to be a curse. You were a protector. A guardian. And my bloodline turned you into a weapon and called it divine right." Inside his chest, inside both their chests now, connected through touch, Riker felt the shadow's presence shift. The constant pressure of rage and hunger that had defined his entire life began to soften. Not disappear, but transform into something that felt almost like hope. "You understand," the shadow whispered, and for the first time in 30 years, its voice held no malice. "Finally, an Ashenblade understands. I understand that you were betrayed." Riker's other hand came up to cradle Dorothy's face, his thumb brushing away the black tears on her cheek. "I understand that every terrible thing you made me do was you trying to break free the only way you knew how. I understand that you're not evil. You're just broken. Like me." The black veins began to glow with that silver-edged light again, brighter than before. "But understanding isn't forgiveness," Dorothy said softly. "Can you truly forgive it? After everything?" Riker closed his eyes, feeling the full weight of 30 years, of 300 executions, of villages burned, of mercy denied and cruelty enacted. Of every night he'd woken screaming from dreams where the shadow wore his face and reveled in blood. Could he forgive that? The answer came not from his head, but from his heart. "The shadow didn't make me into a monster," he said quietly. "It made me into a survivor. Every time it pushed me toward darkness, I pushed back. Every time it demanded 20 deaths, I negotiated it down to 1. I thought I was fighting it." He opened his eyes, meeting Dorothy's swirling gaze. "But I was fighting with it. Against Andy's binding. Against 400 years of chains." His hand tightened on hers. "So yes. I forgive you." He spoke to the shadow directly, letting the words resonate through their connected essences. I forgive you for the rage born of betrayal. I forgive you for the darkness that was forced upon you. I forgive you for every whisper, every demand, every moment of torment, because I understand now. You were never my enemy. You were my prisoner. We both were. The room erupted in silver light. Dorothy arched off the bed, crying out, but not in pain this time. In release. The black veins dissolved into streams of light that poured from her skin like water, swirling through the air in complex patterns that looked almost like ancient words being written in light itself. The binding spell. Andy's curse. 400 years of chains breaking apart. And in the center of it all, Dorothy's body began to transform. The gray pallor of her skin brightened to porcelain. The black in her eyes stabilized into a permanent, beautiful storm cloud swirl. And when she drew breath, it came easy and strong, no longer the wet rattle of corruption, but the clear sound of life renewed. The void shadow had not been destroyed. It had been freed. And in being freed, it had chosen not to flee, but to stay, no longer as a curse bound to bloodline, but as a willing guardian bound to the woman who'd seen its truth. Dorothy sat up, staring at her hands in wonder. It worked. Gods above, it actually worked. Are you? Riker's voice failed him. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw both the maid who'd loved him and the ancient guardian that now lived within her in perfect harmony. I'm alive, she whispered. We're both alive. Then the door exploded inward. Kevin burst through the splintered door, blade drawn, Marin close behind. They froze at the threshold, staring at the impossible scene before them. Dorothy sat upright in the bed, very much alive, her skin glowing with an otherworldly luminescence. The black veins had transformed into delicate silver patterns that traced her arms like living tattoos, pulsing gently with each heartbeat. And Riker knelt beside her, still holding her hand, looking more human than Kevin had seen him in decades. What in the gods' names? Kevin started. Stand down, Riker ordered, his voice calm but firm. She's not a threat. Not a threat? Marin stepped forward, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Your Majesty, that woman just absorbed the void shadow. She should be dead, or worse. She's neither. Riker stood, positioning himself protectively between them and Dorothy. The binding is broken. The shadow is free. The color drained from Kevin's face. Free? Riker, if that thing is loose. It's not loose. It's chosen. Dorothy's voice rang out, carrying a dual resonance that made everyone in the room go still. The void shadow was never the curse. The binding was. Before anyone could respond, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept across the windows. The candles flickered and died. And from the shadows in the corners of the room, something stirred, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. A figure materialized from the darkness itself. Tall, gaunt, wearing robes that looked like they'd been woven from midnight and regret. His face was ancient, eyes like empty voids, and when he spoke, the voice carried the weight of centuries. At last, the specter said. The binding breaks. The guardian is freed. And Andy's bloodline stands exposed. Riker's hand went to his blade. Who are you? I am Clifton Ashenblade. Andy's brother. The one he murdered to keep his secret. The specter's hollow eyes fixed on Riker. I have waited 400 years to see this moment, to see the curse undone and the truth revealed to an Ashenblade king who might actually care. Dorothy gasped. You're a remnant. A ghost bound to witness. Bound to witness every generation inherit my brother's sin, yes. Clifton's gaze shifted to her. But you, Sin-Eater, you've done what I could not. You've freed the Guardian and shown an Ashenblade the truth. For that, you have my gratitude. If you're here to congratulate us, Kevin growled, you picked a hell of a dramatic way to do it. I'm not here to congratulate you. Clifton's form solidified further, and behind him, the shadows began to writhe and take shape. I'm here to warn you. The void shadow was not just a guardian of the boundary between life and death. It was a seal. And by breaking Andy's binding, you've weakened that seal. The floor beneath their feet trembled. What are you saying? Riker demanded. Andy didn't just betray the shadow for power. He betrayed it because he'd already made a deal with something far worse. Clifton pointed toward the floor, where cracks were beginning to form, glowing with sickly green light. He opened a door to the abyss, a realm of pure corruption. The shadow was supposed to help him seal it, but instead, he trapped it inside himself, using its power to hold the door closed while ruling as an untouchable king. Marin stumbled backward. The abyss? That's a myth. It's very real, Dorothy said, her eyes glowing silver as the shadow's ancient knowledge flooded through her. And it's been pushing against the seal for 400 years. Andy's binding kept the shadow weak enough that it couldn't properly maintain the seal, but strong enough that it couldn't escape. The corruption fed through the bloodline, generation after generation, slowly weakening the barrier. The cracks in the floor widened, and from them, tendrils of darkness began to seep, different from the shadow's darkness. This was wrong, unnatural, hungry in a way that made reality itself recoil. You broke the binding, Clifton said, his voice heavy with sorrow and anger both. You freed the shadow. But without it anchored to Ashenblade blood, the seal is failing. The abyss is waking. And it is starving. Riker's mind raced. Then we reseal it. The shadow is free now, it can properly close the door. The shadow alone is not enough. Dorothy stood, her legs shaking but holding. The silver patterns on her skin blazed brighter. Andy's original seal required two things, the shadow's power and Ashenblade blood. That's why he bound it to his bloodline, not just to steal its power, but to create a living seal that would last for generations. She turned to Riker, and in her storm-cloud eyes, he saw what she was thinking. No, he said immediately. Dorothy, no. It's the only way. She crossed to him, taking both his hands in hers. The shadow lives in me now, willingly. And you are the last of the Ashenblade line. Together, we can create a new seal. A true one. Not built on betrayal, but on choice. A seal requires sacrifice, Clifton said quietly. One of you must anchor it. Become its living vessel, bound to the barrier between worlds for as long as you draw breath. Kevin stepped forward. There has to be another way. The floor exploded. A massive tendril of pure corruption burst through the stone, lashing out at anything living. Marin dove aside with a scream. Kevin's blade whistled through the air, severing the tendril, but three more took its place. And from the widening pit in the floor, something began to climb out. A creature of the abyss, shapeless, formless, made of hunger and hate and the absence of everything good. Where it touched the ground, stone withered to dust. Where its presence pressed against the air, reality cracked and bled. Decide quickly, Clifton's voice echoed as his form began to fade. The abyss waits for no one. Seal it together, or watch it devour your kingdom and everything beyond. Dorothy's grip tightened on Riker's hands. I'm not afraid. You should be. His voice was raw. I just got you back. I can't lose you again. You won't. She smiled through tears. We're doing this together, remember? Not as king and servant. Not as captor and prisoner. As partners. The creature lunged. And Riker and Dorothy, hands clasped, silver light and Ashenblade blood combining, spoke the words of the new seal in perfect unison, a binding built not on betrayal, but on love, sacrifice, and the choice to protect a world that had never known their names. The light that erupted from their joined hands was blinding. The light didn't just fill the room, it remade it. When the brilliance finally faded and Kevin could see again, the chamber had transformed. The cracks in the floor were gone, sealed over with veins of pure silver that pulsed with steady, rhythmic light. The creature from the abyss had vanished, dragged back into the depths by chains of starlight. And at the center of it all stood Riker and Dorothy, still holding hands, still alive. But changed. Riker's eyes now carried flecks of silver that hadn't been there before, the shadow's gift, freely given. And Dorothy's entire being seemed to shimmer between solid and ethereal, as though she existed slightly outside normal reality. "The seal is complete," she said, her voice carrying both her own warm tones and the shadow's ancient resonance. "But it's different from Andy's. We're not a prison. We're a bridge." "A bridge?" Marin approached cautiously, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. "What does that mean?" Riker flexed his free hand, feeling the new connection thrumming through his veins. "The old seal worked by suppressing the shadow, weakening it so it couldn't maintain the barrier properly. Our seal works by amplifying both of us. The shadow's power flows through Dorothy, and my blood, the last of the Ashenblade line, anchors it to this world. We hold the door closed together," Dorothy continued. "Not through chains and captivity, but through choice. As long as we both live, as long as we remain connected, the abyss stays sealed." Kevin sheathed his blade slowly. "Connected how?" The silver patterns on Dorothy's arms pulsed, and matching marks appeared on Riker's, a mirror image, two halves of the same seal. When they released each other's hands, the marks dimmed but didn't disappear. "Bonded," Riker said quietly. "Not like the old curse. This is a partnership. We share the burden. Share the strength." "You mean you're bound to a servant girl for the rest of your life?" Marin's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes held concern. "Your Majesty, the Council will never—" "The Council," Riker interrupted, his voice taking on the commanding edge of a king who'd just saved his kingdom from annihilation, "will accept that the woman who freed me from a 400-year curse and sealed the abyss is no longer a servant. She's the guardian of Blackmore. My equal in every way that matters." Dorothy's eyes widened. "Riker, you don't have to." "I'm not doing this because I have to." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since he was 12 years old, his expression held no shadows, no hidden pain. Just honesty. "I'm doing this because I choose to. The same way you chose to save a king you had every reason to hate. The same way the shadow chose to stay rather than flee. We're all choosing, Dorothy. That's what makes this different." Tears slipped down her cheeks, clear and bright, with no trace of darkness. "I don't know how to be anything but a maid." "Good. Because I don't know how to be anything but a king who's been at war with himself for 3 decades. He smiled, and it was genuine, the first real smile Kevin had seen on his friend's face since childhood. "We'll figure it out together." The silver marks on their skin flared once, then settled into a soft, steady glow. Behind them, Clifton's fading specter managed one last whisper. "The curse is broken. The seal is made whole. And Andy's sin is finally forgiven." His form dissipated into light, 400 years of witnessing finally released into peace. Months later. The throne room of Blackmore Castle had never been so full. Representatives from every pack in the kingdom stood shoulder to shoulder, watching as their Alpha King made an announcement that would reshape the future of their world. For 400 years, Riker's voice rang out across the assembled crowd, "The Ashenblade bloodline has ruled through power inherited from darkness. You feared me because I wielded the void shadow. You obeyed because you had no choice." He stood not on the raised throne platform, but on the same level as his people. Beside him, Dorothy wore robes of silver and gray, no longer a maid's uniform, but the formal attire of the newly created position of guardian. "Today, I stand before you not as a king bound by curse, but as a man given a second chance." Riker's gaze swept the room. "The void shadow is no longer my jailer. It is my partner. And the woman who freed us both is now the seal that keeps the true darkness at bay. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, some skeptical, all uncertain. I know you have questions, Riker continued. I know some of you doubt whether a former servant can stand as guardian. Whether a king who once ruled through fear can rule through something else. He paused. I doubt it too. Every single day. The honesty silenced the room. But doubt is not weakness. It's wisdom. And I would rather rule with questions than with the false certainty that comes from stolen power. He extended his hand to Dorothy, and she took it without hesitation. The silver marks on their skin blazed bright enough for everyone to see. The seal we created requires both of us. Her strength and my blood. Her compassion and my authority. We are bound together, not by curse, but by choice. And that bond is the only thing standing between this kingdom and the abyss. Dorothy stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. I was born a sin-eater. Trained to absorb darkness that others couldn't bear. I never imagined I would become a guardian. But the void shadow showed me the truth, that the most powerful transformations come not from destroying darkness, but from understanding it. Accepting it. And choosing to wield it for protection rather than domination. She looked at Riker, and the love in her eyes was unmistakable. This king could have let me die. Could have taken the shadow back and continued ruling as his ancestors did. Instead, he chose forgiveness. He chose partnership. He chose to break 400 years of tradition for a chance at something better. And that, Riker said, his voice soft but carrying through the silent hall, is the future I'm offering Blackmore. Not a kingdom ruled by fear, but one protected by choice. Not a throne built on darkness, but one illuminated by those brave enough to transform it. He raised their joined hands high. The curse is broken. The seal is whole. And we stand together, not as king and subject, but as guardians of a kingdom that deserves better than the sins of its past. The silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Kevin, standing at the front of the crowd, dropped to one knee. Long live the king. Long live the guardian. The pledge rippled through the room, growing louder with each voice that joined until the throne room shook with the sound of a kingdom choosing its future. That night, Riker found Dorothy on the highest tower of the castle, looking out over Blackmore as moonlight painted everything silver. Thinking about the future? He asked, coming to stand beside her. Thinking about the past. She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. 2 years ago, I was a maid who couldn't even speak your name without trembling. Now I'm bound to you for life, protecting a kingdom from an ancient evil. She laughed softly. It's insane. Completely. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Any regrets? Only one. She turned in his arms, her storm cloud eyes meeting his silver-flecked gaze. That it took me 2 years to tell you I loved you. You were busy, he said with a smile. Saving my soul, one confession at a time. And now? Now we save each other. He cupped her face in his hands. Every day. For as long as we both shall live. And longer, she whispered, feeling the seal pulse warm and steady between them. The bond doesn't end with death. The shadow made sure of that. Good. Riker kissed her then, soft and deep and full of promise. Because one lifetime with you will never be enough. Far below, Blackmore slept peacefully, protected not by fear or force, but by 2 souls who'd chosen love over darkness, partnership over power, and forgiveness over 400 years of hate. The curse was broken. The kingdom was whole. And in the highest tower of the castle, the Alpha King and his guardian stood together, watching the stars and dreaming of a future they would build side by side. Forever bound. Forever free. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional, powerful tales from the world of werewolf shifter romance. Drop a comment and let me know which part hit you the hardest. I love hearing from you all. Until next time, remember, even the darkest curses can be broken by love and the courage to forgive. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.